Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. It is Friday night, October 19th, 2018. And tonight we're going to be talking about a story I wrote earlier today about Russia's big gold purchase in September. But first, let's take a look at the gold and silver markets today, do a little analysis, take a look at the stock markets, the cryptocurrency markets, then we're going to go through some charts on the Russian gold purchase. So first, let's roll over to the gold market and see what happened. Now, the stock market was a bit mixed, so you would expect the gold market probably to be mixed as well. And if that's what you were expecting, well, that's pretty much what you got. And here is the gold price today. Pretty much up and down, not too much movement. Opened up at $12.25. Went about $5 higher, went down to $12.23, closed at $12.26, up a buck, 0.08% increase, really no movement at all. Now the equity markets were mixed. The Dow was up about 0.25%, Nasdaq was down about 0.5%, S&P down about, well, actually S&P was flat. So the Dow was at 2544, up 64 points. Nasdaq was down 36 points to 74.49, and S&P was essentially unchanged at 2767. And gold was pretty much the same. And the dollar index also didn't move much, fell towards the end of the day. So pretty much a lackluster market. Now silver managed to do a little bit better than gold, but nothing to write home about. Well, let's take a look at the silver price. Silver was opened at $14.55. Did have a nice little rally up to $14.69 and then closed at $14.61. So not a bad day. Actually a better day than gold today, up 0.39%. I mean, you gain a nickel in silver. That's a pretty big move. 6 cents even better. You gain 14% at 14 cents, you gain a dime, you're almost gaining a full percentage point at these low levels. And what did that do to the gold silver ratio? Well, it moved the needle a little bit down, but you still, I think you're going to be at 84 probably. Yep. Opened at 84.19 to 1, got as high as 85.73. I'm not sure what that was from. I think maybe a charting error. But in any event, the gold silver price closed at 84.01. Now, over on the crypto side, they've been relatively calm. They had been calm for about 6 weeks. Then they fell early last or mid last week when they had the stock market collapse, and then they went back up and then they leveled down again. So Bitcoin surprisingly stable at 63.77. That's just down 0.2% over the last 24 hours. Bitcoin Cash 435, up 1% over the last 24 hours. Ethereum 199.81, up 0.37 over the last 24 hours. Litecoin, big gainer, 1.1%, up to 52.51. And Ethereum Classic up 0.11% at 9.51. Some significant crypto stories during the week. We're not going to cover them tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about Russia. We're going to talk about Russian gold reserves. Now, last month, Russia added 1 million ounces in August to gold reserves. And this month, they decided to tack on a bit more. So let's take a look at what's been going on with Russian gold reserves. And you can see on the chart now, I believe the chart should be there for you. This chart is from June 2014 to September 2017. And you can see there's been 9 months of at least 1 million ounces being added to reserves. So that's a significant amount. And you can see also, I'm not sure why August is showing. Oh, I'm showing you the wrong chart. I knew there was something wrong. I pulled up the September 2017 chart. No, you're going to see something a little nicer looking than that. Let me get you the gold chart for up to 2018. That chart only goes to 2017. Apologies for that. Let's pull up the Russian gold for September 2000 and that one's 17. Let me get you the one for 18. Knew there was something wrong there. Aha, there it is. All right, much nicer looking chart there. Okay, now you can see that this year is when you're getting a big upswing. The last 2 months there, you've got the 1 million ounces to the far right in August, and then you have September. You have the September number of 1.2 million. Now, for those you keeping track in tons, 1 million ounces is about 31 tons, 31.10348 tons to be exact. So significant amounts of gold each and every month. And now if you go all the way over, you can see the biggest month was October 2016, where they brought in 1.3 million ounces. That's over 40 tons of gold. So Russia clearly leading the foreign central banks in gold reserves. Now let me show you something from last night. Last night we were talking about how Hungary had added about 28 tons of gold. And Hungary was saying that, like other central banks, everyone's adding gold. And I showed this chart, which really showed that that's not the case. It's really Russia that's adding the gold reserves. Now what this chart shows is, this does not include today's announcement of the 37 extra tons. What this chart shows is this chart shows the central bank gold additions in 2018. And this one shows Russia at 160 tons, Kazakhstan at 31 through August, India 15, and then Hungary with that 28 tons. But then you can see the rest of them are either slightly negative or slightly positive. Poland's probably about 11, 12 tons there. Argentina, I think 7 tons. But for the most part, at this chart, there were 257 tons of gold added by central banks. Now, what I showed also last night was what 257 tons actually means. Doesn't mean much, because if you look at it in the context of what India brings in every month, or how much gold they mine in 8 or 9 months a year. You know, they mined probably this year so far through September 2,000 tons, and central banks added 257. But the real story is that if you add back in, which I haven't done, but if you add back in the latest Russian gold reserves, the 37 additional tons, that brings us up to 284 tons. Now, before you add that in, I said last night that Russia accounted for 63% of all central bank gold buying this year. Well, if you add in the 37 tons now, that takes Russia to 199 tons this year. Excuse me, out of 289, which would mean that Russia has nearly 70% of all the gold that was purchased by central banks this year. So clearly, Russia is the story when it comes to central banks. Let's just take a look also at some other of these Russian charts that we made. Oh, by the way, Dollar Collapse had a nice article today featuring the Smaulgld Indian chart. He said gold is becoming cool again. And he was talking about how India ramping up its buying, as we talked about last night. Then he went into the Hungarian purchase. So there seems to be some recognition lately that gold, at least from the foreign central banks, is getting a bit more attention. Not just from Russia, but again, Russia is the main thing. But India is, it's not so much that the Indian central bank is buying, but that the Indians themselves are buying. And they've added in the 95 tons. That's a lot of gold to import in a single month. I was actually going to call tonight something about, I think it's a better headline, gold is becoming cool again, that they had in Dollar Collapse. Okay, now let's just see what does this look like for Russia. And you can just see the inexorable climb of gold being added to reserves from 1281 all the way up to 2037 in a very short period of time since June 2015. So last year they added 224 tons, the year before I think 199. They just keep adding more and more gold, and this chart shows about 760 tons being piled on. Now that brings Russia up to about, it's 2,037 tons, but that puts them in 5th place amongst gold holding central banks. And this chart, last night we looked at the top 20. This chart is a little more granular, and it'll show you the top 10, and you can have a better look at it. And you can see the United States in first place at 8,133, going down to Germany 3,370, the IMF. Now that IMF gold, that belongs to individual member states that put gold in when they joined. Then you got Italy at 2451, France right behind them at 2435, and then you got Russia 2037. So if they keep adding a couple of hundred tons or more a year, they'll put themselves, you know, probably into 3rd place. They'll probably pass France and Italy. One interesting thing to note about the top 10 gold holding nations is, other than the recent additions by the Reserve Bank of India, who added gold for the first time in about 10 years, they added about 12, 13 tons. None of these countries are adding gold. United States gold reserves have been at that level since the 50s. Germany, no, not since the 50s. That's the last time they audited it. Since they closed the gold window, they never added back the gold that they lost when the foreign central banks were coming and collecting gold. Germany also is in decline, loses about 4 to 6 tons a year to the government. They don't replace it. They sell it to the government to make German gold coins, and it doesn't end up back at the bank. Now, Germany has repatriated gold, but has not added gold. IMF, that's a pretty solid number. France, Italy have not added any gold. It's Russia that's moved on up to 2037. The People's Bank of China moved up from 950 tons up to there. They stopped adding in October of 2016, which was coincidentally the month that they got accepted into the SDR in October 2015, and they officially entered into that basket in October 2016. I guess they figure you stop running once you catch the bus, and they stopped adding gold. Switzerland at 1040, they used to have about 2,200 tons of gold. They sold 60% of it when they joined the IMF in early 2000s, and also they haven't added any, so they've been at 1040 for the longest time. Same with Japan, 765, Netherlands 613. Now the Netherlands also did a repatriation run, but again they didn't add any gold, so you're not seeing much movement in the top 10, or really even in the top 20. I don't have it for you tonight, but we see Kazakhstan moving up all the way from like 26th place to 13th place. They've passed Saudi Arabia. They passed the United Kingdom. So Kazakhstan, as you saw on that other chart, is is the second largest purchaser of gold behind, let's give you a quick refresher, behind Russia with 160. Kazakhstan will probably add about 50 tons of gold this year to reserves. I doubt Hungary will keep adding. I think that looked like a one-time purchase. India may inch up, but really the movement in gold reserves clearly in the Russian camp. And Kazakhstan has added gold for 71 months in a row. Now, let's go back to the Russian chart. Russia even misses an odd month here and there. You can see it looks like in early 2015, January and February, they didn't add any. They take a break once in a while. Looks like in December of 2017, they probably hit their target and they didn't buy more. So Kazakhstan is even a more consistent buyer of gold than Russia. But I just showed you the old one again. That's not the one I wanted to show you. But anyway, you get the idea on the Russian gold monthly purchases. Now, one more chart I want to show you on Russia is this one. This shows historically, since going back to 1994, the Russian gold purchases. And you can see in the late 90s, early 2000s, not only were they not buying gold, they were selling off their reserves. A couple of big years, 48 tons sold, 44 tons sold. Now, it's interesting. They're selling that gold going into Y2K, which is very strange. I don't know what other central banks were doing at the time, but I know Americans were buying gold. Europeans were buying gold in anticipation of the year 2000, Y2K they called it back then. They were worried that the computers would not roll over properly and you'd have massive shutdowns of grids, plane systems, things wouldn't work, and people would need to go back to essentially a barter system because they thought that there was going to be a massive computer failure. But more importantly, if you move over to the right now, you can see the financial crisis hits 2009, 10. Russia ramps up its buying. Also, then you see the last since 2014, pretty much averaging over 200 tons a year. I mean, this year they'll probably do, maybe they'll beat the 224 probably, unless they stop buying. But they could, at this pace, do 260 tons. Now, there's a chart on the Smaulgld site that shows the Russian gold production versus how much of that gold they actually purchase and then put into the central bank. And there's not much room between the two. They may, last year I think they may have mined 260 tons, and as you can see they put 224 of those tons into the central bank. So what Russia does is they convert their rubles into gold. They buy from the domestic suppliers. Makes a lot of sense for them, and I don't see that ending anytime soon. They're also doing more exploration. They've got some Chinese financing to do some more mines. They sell some gold to China, and this year they arranged to sell some to they arranged to sell some to India as well. So that's the story today. You can go over to Smaulgld.com. You can see these charts better. There's a few more charts other than the ones I just showed you here, and they're updated there. Sorry, I showed you the 2017 one a couple of times, but the one on the website goes all the way through 2018. All right, let's see if we got any questions, comments on this Friday night, and see what we got in the comments. Esper Hunter says, hello, hello. So does Steve Hall is back. Good to see you, Steve. Bullseye, for practical purposes, would interest-free ZIRP or negative interest rate policy, zero interest rate policy, negative interest rate policy, fiat currency functions similar to money created debt-free? No. If I get your question, even though there's no interest being paid on a fiat currency or there's a negative interest rate, it still has to be created out of thin air. Oh, I see what you're saying. As if it's done by, like, say, the Treasury issues the paper as opposed to the Federal Reserve, and therefore no debt is incurred like they had with those they had Federal Reserve notes, but they also had what's called U.S. notes that they started printing in 1878, and they made those all the way through 1966. Those were U.S. notes, and they weren't issued with debt. They were just issued. The impact is, obviously, you don't have to pay interest, but then again, if there is no interest, and I see what you're saying, and you're issuing a Federal Reserve note, but you're not paying interest on it, then what's the difference? I guess the difference there is, as long as there is no interest, it's just a function of what the prudence is in terms of the amount of currency that's issued. Now, one thing a lot of people don't realize, and they yell in the Fed, which I understand, is if a country takes control of its own currency, like the Treasury in most countries, they're not necessarily any better of a steward of the money supply. I mean, they would, in fact, there might be instances where they're worse, where politicians would just toss money out there left and right. So anytime you have a fiat currency, you're always going to have the issue of how prudent is the issuer? That's the issue of the issuer. Are they going to create money as needed, or are they going to create money to boost the money supply, to create inflation, which in their minds creates economic activity? Go figure. So, I don't know. When people say end the Fed, you may just end up having an equally corrupt or reckless monetary policy being conducted by the Treasury. Imagine if you had some of the famous Democrats, the Bernie Sanders, and so on, running the Treasury. So, the one thing about the Fed is it's supposedly independent, and they supposedly, I know in the 1979, 80, 81 period, when Volcker was raising interest rates, the unions were throwing bricks and sending bricks to the Federal Reserve because they wanted them to lower the interest rates, because it was the higher interest rates were choking off housing construction, because who was going to buy a house at a 20% mortgage? So I've studied the Fed. I've studied other monetary. When people say they want the Fed ended, they want the excesses ended. There's really nothing wrong with a central bank, but that's not what the Fed is. The Fed isn't a central. The problem with the Fed is it's a private bank. The way it was organized, it looks after the interest of the other private banks, and it's not just a bank of last resort. It's in charge of monetary policy. It's in charge of full employment. It has too many powers, and unfortunately, the Congress delegated those powers. Now, there is debt-free money in the United States. A lot of people don't think of it this way, but all your coinage, pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, they don't make half dollars for circulation anymore, but most people don't know that. And also those dollar coins, they are debt-free. Those are minted by the U.S. Treasury. They're not issued by the Federal Reserve. They're not Federal Reserve notes. So some say, if you want to hold on to dollars, you should hold on to dollar coins rather than the Federal Reserve notes. 6 of one, half dozen the other, probably, but there is a distinction there. Those are not debt-based, the dollar coins. You got to go to the bank and get. You never see them in circulation. But I did look up the mintage numbers. They're pretty high. They made a lot of them. They stopped making them. They still make them, but they don't make the presidential coins they were making. They stopped making them for circulation, just like they did with the half dollar. You can get them, but you have to buy them from the mint, and you pay more than the face value, which defeats the purpose. I know my kids were collecting them, the presidential ones, and then they stopped around, I don't know, Franklin Roosevelt, and then you had to buy them from the mint, which we didn't do. It's a shame. But the thing is, most people don't use them. I've had them, and I try to use them in stores, and they look at you like, what's this? And they go, oh, it's $1. But it is $1, and it is officially issued by the U.S. Mint, which is under the Treasury. I read the other day the Mint used to be directly reporting to the president, but now it reports to the Treasury, and then the Treasury reports to El Presidente. Okay, so Shepard is here. Hello. Pablo Peña. An example. Say China imports gold to their reserves. The number includes import and domestic mining. Okay, so China is a different story than Russia. So one thing everyone has to understand about central banks, and everyone makes this mistake about China. I don't know why. They don't make it about India. You saw the Reserve Bank of India has 580 tons, and then People's Bank of China has 1,843 tons. When you mention that China's got 1,843 tons, People's Bank of China, they're lying. They have more than that. They got 20,000, 30,000, gold, back yuan, game changer, all this nonsense about China. When it's the People's Bank of China, that's what they say they have. That's probably what they have. That doesn't mean there's not more gold in China. It doesn't mean there's not other entities in China that have gold. It doesn't mean there's not other banks. No one goes through that whole conspiracy talk when you mention India. Everyone somehow understands intuitively that when you say the Reserve Bank of India has got 580 tons, they say, yeah, but the people have 10,000, 20,000 tons, and the temples have 4,000 tons. Everyone seems to understand that, but with China, there's like this gold pumping narrative that they created, that China's doing the gold, back yuan, game changer, Sun Tzu, and all this BS about China, when they import a lot of gold. They mine a lot of gold. In fact, China is the #1 mining country in the world. That gold, most of it, stays in China. It doesn't necessarily all go to the People's Bank of China. I don't know why that's so hard for people to understand. They're not lying. They just don't have to hold all of the country's gold at the People's Bank of China, just like all the gold in India isn't at the Reserve Bank of India. So I've done charts on this and on articles on this and published in Zero Hedge where I show, sure, it doesn't take a genius to know that there's more than 1,843 tons of gold in China, when we know over the last 10, 15 years, they've mined over 5,000 tons and they haven't exported any of it. We know that they've imported thousands of tons through Hong Kong that's actually accounted for and official. So that's like 12,000, 13,000 tons right there. And we know the People's Bank of China doesn't have 12,000, 13,000 tons. But there was all this speculation. They're lying and they're hiding it in Sun Tzu. They're going to roll it out into a stadium. It's all nonsense. In fact, the People's Bank of China said that a lot of the gold they have is in subsidiary banks. It's in sovereign wealth funds. It's all over the country. It's in private citizens' hands. It's in the party leaders' hands. It's in wealth funds. It's all over the place. So anyway, people make a big deal out of China. And by the way, when the people going on about China, they never mention how much credit China issues each day, each week, each month, each year. China is the biggest debt monster on the planet. And somehow the people who report on gold make it sound like China is some type of sound money gold paradise. It's not. China would never do a gold-backed yuan. China is so dependent on credit, so dependent on their board of governors. The guy at the People's Bank of China said, this was like 8 months ago, we've probably already reached a Minsky moment, and saying we should prepare for disaster, that they have borrowed so much money and they have so much bad debt in their entire system, from state-owned banks to state-owned enterprises, that the only way they can generate more GDP is by issuing more credit. And they know at some point they run out of bridges and nowhere to make. They run out of parking lots to build. That's why they try this Belt and Road nonsense, where they try to export all that credit overseas. And now they're getting pushed back. Countries are canceling the projects. They don't think they're economical. And remember, in a centrally planned economy, they don't build according to market demand. They build according to what they centrally plan. So they say, oh, we may need a city over there one day, so let's build a bunch of ridges and roads to it, and then we'll build a lot of high-rises, and maybe people will move in, maybe they won't, but we're counting on that to produce 0.8% of this year's GDP. So go lend the money to the state-owned enterprises and then have them go build it and have the people employed, and then we'll see if it doesn't work, if it works out. If it works out, fine. If not, we'll just build more next to it. That's what China's been doing. I mean, yes, they have manufacturing, but their big generation in GDP is all this manufacturing, property development, and so on. And they want to get away from that. They want to move into services. Easier said than done when you've got 400 million people that have moved into these cities from the countryside over the last 10, 15 years. They've got to be kept busy. And you talk about unfunded liabilities. China has 1 billion people that are going to retire. Who's going to pay their Social Security? Who's going to pay their Medicaid? See, people have focused. Dollar collapse, end of dollar hegemony, game changer. China is in far worse shape. Far, 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 far worse shape. The Chinese yuan, they're worried about it now going to 7-to-1 to the dollar. They might have to do a devaluation. China is not gold paradise. It's not your gold buddy. Now, Russia, on the other hand, if you want to look at the comparative finances, Russia, the gold means something. That gold is 17% of their reserves, and they don't have a lot of debt, and they're not consumer driven. China today now is also spending a lot of money. The people of China are borrowing money, a lot of consumer debt, to buy real estate, to buy cars, to buy a lot of stuff. The Russian economy is not a debt driven economy. It is a commodity driven economy with agriculture and oil leading the way. And again, they've got a significant gold mining production. But even so, the Russian ruble is a weak currency. That's more because they're isolated and they're always under sanctions. I would imagine if Russia could manage to get itself off sanctions and wean itself away from Iran and become more of a European country and trade with the EU, trade with China, trade with the US, then their currency might do a bit better. All right, what else do we got? DWY2K was a computer programming problem. That is correct. It was 1999, and they were worried that the 4 numbers had to get to 2000. So they did spend an inordinate amount of time trying to figure that problem out. And I think they did figure it out. Nothing happened on January 1st when midnight struck. DW, would Congress pull the Fed charter and create a U.S. central bank? Would it make a difference? I think that, yeah, it could. The Congress could end the Fed. I mean, I did a YouTube on this the other night, and I was saying, well, the first thing they'd have to do, and I gave, you might want to go back and listen to this one. There were 3 examples where congressmen brought impeachment charges against the federal governors, against the Fed chair and its members. I'm not going to go through that tonight, but the first thing I think they'd have to do, I don't think if you just impeach the members that does you any good. They'll just replace them with new ones. But I think if the next Congress votes to audit the Fed, if they find anything that's outrageous or shocking, which it probably is, especially related to the financial crisis. I mean, there's supposedly a lot of money went flying out the door from the Fed, and it didn't just go into the too-big-to-fail U.S. banks. It went overseas, went all over the place. If people can actually see that there's malfeasance and that the bank isn't necessarily acting in U.S. Best interest, then you could get a groundswell to have it closed down. But the question is, would creating a U.S. central bank be any better? And would the congressman on the Financial Services Committee, I think Maxine Waters would be the head of the Financial Services Committee. Let me just see what she is. So I don't think she would understand the issue, and I just don't think you'd get any. Yeah, I think she's on the Financial Services Committee. She could become the chairman if the Democrats win. Congressman Maxine Waters, ranking member of the House Committee on Financial Services. You get out there and you create a crowd. That's what she's going to tell. Okay, so, yeah, I don't know. And since there's not, after Ron Paul left, there really has been no talk about ending the Fed. The audit the Fed thing that Rand Paul put forward didn't pass. So I'm not sure, unless Trump leads it and he gets really pissed off because they keep raising rates and the economy goes into a recession, then you might see some movement. But I don't think the current Congress, it's not just a cut on Maxine Waters, I don't think any of them really are steeped in Fed history. I think the way they look at the Fed is what they think the Fed policy should be, not should we or should we not have a Fed. And if we got rid of the Fed, what, if anything, would replace it? I don't think they've gone down that path of thought. And clearly Maxine Waters would not be the one to lead on that. I think she would just say she'd be more interested in the interest rates, and that's about it. Or printing money to go to a special interest group. But I don't think she'd have any insights into what should happen if indeed, to get rid of the Fed, to replace the Fed. I don't think any of them are thinking that way. Maybe Rand Paul might have some ideas on it. All right. What else we got into questions? Pablo Pina. Is that why China builds islands running out of land? No, China builds islands for military purposes, to assert itself in the South China Sea. Because the United States is basically the world's policeman for controlling supply lines. And they want to have a little hegemony in their region, so they build these islands. And they haven't really been challenged about them. And in a sense, I think a lot of the islands are like aircraft. They can fly aircraft in and out of them. But yeah, sure, I'm sure there's also some financial activity that they can get out of making them. A lot of work to be done. So, Dee Dee says, good evening. All right, well, that about does it, unless we got any more comments or questions for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Make sure to go over to the Smaulgld site and check that out and subscribe there. You never know how long this gig is going to last on YouTube. I'm probably not the first one they're going to shut down, but who knows what might happen. There's the Smaulgld site. You can get a Smaulgld mug over there. You can free shipping on the Smaulgld mugs. I'll even throw in a free eraser tonight if you buy tonight. If you want other Smaulgld products, check them out. I'll give you a link for that. It helps the site out. Make $1 or $2 on each purchase on that. And also, the best way you can be my buddy and help me out is becoming a Smaulgld patron, joining the, I don't know, I think I got 10, 15 patrons that donate a small amount each and every month. I'll give you the list there. Or you can donate via PayPal, or you can consider buying your gold or silver through the Smaulgld links. I've got affiliate links from SD Bullion, Money Metals Exchange, and the Golden Eagle coins. You can compare pricing and shipping on at those sites. There's some specials going on, and Smaulgld gets a small commission if you do buy from those links. Not investment advice to buy gold or silver, but you guys, if you know what you're doing or you consulted your financial advisor, you're going to buy gold or silver. It's not investment advice, but if you're going to, please consider doing so through the Smaulgld links. Oh, we got another question here. What's your thoughts on selling off U.S. debt? I have to give the Fed credit for somehow managing to pull this off. When they did the third QE, I thought this is it. They're done. This is reckless. The third QE was bigger than the other two. The way the Fed pulled it off, and I've done a YouTube on this too, is every time when they announced QE, the dollar would drop. The longer they did QE, the dollar would continue to go down, and then they'd stop it. And then the dollar would rise again, and then they announce another QE, and then the dollar would go down, and then it would go down, 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 then they'd stop it. Well, by the time they did the third one, I said, no one's going to believe this anymore. This is nuts. These guys are just printing money, buying garbage, monetizing debt. It's going to be over. But the smart thing they did during QE3 is they kept talking about taper. Remember the taper tantrums? They were going to taper. They were going to taper. Then they were going to end, and they actually started talking about raising rates before they even ended QE. And the key thing that they did was they convinced Stanley Fischer convinced Mario Draghi to do QE pretty much 3 months after the U.S. stopped. The Fed stopped its QE. Japan launched theirs the day the U.S. stopped theirs. China never stopped printing. So then the Fed has raised interest rates since then 7 times. It sold off a bit of its balance sheet. And essentially, the Fed is actually the prudent central bank right now. Now, having gone through this ridiculous imprudence, they've managed to convince the world to be even more imprudent. They got zero interest rate policies. They've got negative interest rates in Japan. So, and they're still doing QE. In fact, the EU's, the ECB's QE is now larger than the Fed's QE reign of terror. It's like over $5 trillion. And also, these central banks also buy private corporate bonds. The U.S. only bought the mortgage-backed securities and agency debt and U.S. bonds. But then the Swiss National Bank prints money. They buy equities. And I think Japan buys most of the equities in the Japanese stock market. So I think it's a good thing. I mean, if you're going to have central banks, you want yours to be the prudent one. All these people that were complaining about the Fed, lower interest rates, artificial rates, can't raise rates, won't raise rates. Now that they're raising them, they're complaining. I mean, they just don't like the Fed. I understand that. But if you're going to have a Fed, you're better off with higher interest rates that are away from, this artificial stimulus, accommodative policy, as Janet Yellen used to call it. All right. Well, thank you very much, and we will see you again tomorrow night. Thank you for spending Friday evening with me, and we'll see you tomorrow.